This is the second ZOMG-ZIP 1014 Independent Review Committee meeting. Jason McGee, I go by Quiet Investor on the forum. Last meeting, we evaluated the Zcash Foundation's plan to address some of the issues brought up by Chris, ML, and other ZOMG committee members on the forum. Their plan included increasing the monthly time commitment from 5 hours per month to 15 hours per month, a corresponding pay increase from $500 per month to $1,500 per month, and actively increasing support for ZOMG by hiring the ecosystems relationship manager to support ZOMG, and also establishing a RFI process for additional support to help assist ZOMG members assess the technical aspects of grant proposals and advise on other issues. I think everyone agreed that the changes the foundation made are very helpful. However, one of the themes that repeatedly came up was whether or not the current structure between the foundation and ZOMG is too constrictive for the type of talent we're trying to attract. People who are creative, who are leaders, who are prominent and well-respected individuals, both inside and outside the crypto space. These type of people need creative space to operate. So this meeting will discuss the prospect of amending ZIP 1014 to allow ZOMG a bit more autonomy. Now, to be clear, based on last discussion, I think we all agree we're not talking about doing anything dramatic like making ZOMG a fully independent entity or separating or bifurcating ZOMG from the Zcash Foundation in any way. What we're talking about is making a modest change to ZIP 1014 that allows ZOMG to do things like hire contractors for support in limited circumstances. The amendment would not turn ZOMG into an independent operating company. It would leave the foundation's oversight in place, which would continue to administer and disperse the ZOMG funds. The goal is to give ZOMG a bit more autonomy while maintaining the overall integrity of ZIP 1014 and not disturbing the balance of power that exists between ECC and the Zcash Foundation. Now, having said that, I think there are interesting questions about the future of ZOMG, its role in a more decentralized Zcash ecosystem, and whether or not it should eventually be a fully independent entity. I think that's a discussion worth having, but I think we all agree it's a huge conversation that should be saved for a later date. So today we're focused on how to make ZOMG more effective and more efficient so that a year from now, we're not in a situation where 4 out of 5 incumbent members don't want to run for re-election because they're unhappy with the structural issues that were never adequately addressed. So my objective today is to take the feedback and input from the discussion, translate it into a draft amendment to ZIP 1014 that I can ultimately present to the community for consideration. My hope is that it'll be modest and non-controversial. It'll complement the recent changes made by the Zcash Foundation, and it'll be something that the community overwhelmingly supports. So with that, I'll turn it over to the panel. My first question is, generally speaking, what are the pros and cons to amending ZIP 1014 to allow a discretionary budget subject to 501c3 restrictions that permits committee members to allocate financial resources to make itself more effective? And additionally, are there any significant organizational or operational hurdles like opening a bank account that would need to be considered? Anyone want to volunteer to start up?
I guess the sort of thing that I'm wondering about here is what sort of what sort of spending, what sort of things would ZOMG be looking to spend this budget on? I know that in the previous call there was talk of hiring someone to build a website, but I'm just curious. Yeah, I guess I'm just curious. What is the budget for, and how much are we talking about? On the specific question of whether there would need to be a separate bank account, there's no reason, I don't off the top of my head and subject to further discussion. But I don't think there's any reason why the foundation couldn't continue to administer those funds and make whatever relevant payments were needed to be made. But yeah, I think we need more information to be able to confirm that.
I can chime in here. I don't know if I'll be on the next panel, but I can help represent a little bit. I think the goal of any funds that we spend will be to help us achieve our goal of effectively dispersing the funds that are in our treasury, to find the best projects and to responsibly discharge these investments or grants. And you talk about our website, I think that is probably the most simplest example we can think of. There may be ad hoc ideas around, hey, let's send somebody to go to this conference to help us shop around to push our agenda as a grant foundation that is suffering from a lack of good applications, a very severe lack of good applications. I think yesterday we met again and there was only one new application for a $3,000 grant. And it was, it doesn't necessarily help us achieve our longer term goal. There was a short term impact that was the goal of that small grant. So we have been for a while as the community focuses on much larger, more active, more DeFi friendly projects, we have been suffering from a lack of interest on the grant side. And I think we need to do a lot of work. And I can't tell you now, I don't think the next panel can tell you ahead of brainstorming and putting together their collective resources. They can't tell you either what exactly those funds will be spent on. Maybe to flip the question back to you, Jack, what kind of funding would you be uncomfortable seeing us or the next ZOMG panel spend its funds on? So I guess trying to flip it from a, rather than asking for permission for everything that we do, it should, I think, more healthily be flipped around to a, what are the things we cannot do? And we'll just steer clear of those.
Like for me, again, it always comes back to ZIP 1014. So I guess the question is, would ZIP 1014 allow ZOMG to make a grant that was the purpose of which was to support the ZOMG mission? And my gut feel is that it does. I think the only sort of hesitancy I have, and this isn't so much a reluctance on my part as a kind of a red tape issue, but for example, would there be any issues with, for example, ZOMG issuing a grant which was used to pay for ZOMG members to travel to a conference? And we'd have to look into that, and hopefully we'll soon have some further information about the whole inurement issue. But I think
that wouldn't be a grant, right? We're talking about changing the ZIP 1014. So we're not, I would like to kind of refocus us, and maybe Jason can help with some of the shepherding here. I think the purpose of this independent committee is to figure out how we need to modify the wording behind ZIP 1014. So I think it's a bit of a irrelevant question as to what it says right now. And in your case, in your example, where the purpose of a budget is so that we can just spend funds on things that matter, including if maybe one of these panelists, committee members, want to go on a conference to actively solicit new grant applicants. I don't think it would come in the form of a grant. It should come out of the allocated budget. And in addition, the way I was going with this conference was somebody else would go. We would ask somebody else to go.
I'd like to point out that depending on the amount we're talking about, there might be a simpler alternative. The foundation can decide unilaterally and within the confines of the ZIP 1014 as we know it, to provide a discretionary budget to the ZOMG that the ZOMG can use as a business expense for the foundation through the suitable process. And that can be used for expenses like a part-time webmaster or travel. And the catch with that, of course, is that it would come out of the wrong slice. It would come out of the ZOMG slice rather than the ZF slice rather than the ZOMG slice, which is why the quantities matter. If we're talking sufficiently small quantities that, relatively speaking, it doesn't matter much, then maybe this is the simplest way forward. So I too am very curious about the magnitudes that you currently envision, not a detailed budget item by item, but how many digits are you talking?
I don't know. I think we need some sensible amount, but if the funds, I appreciate the sentiment around, to kind of just sequester a percentage that is reasonable for us for an alternative to this budget. But I think it is better, it is structurally more correct if we don't have to ask the ZF for approval for minor expenses. It does feel like we have a dad that we need to ask for funds from, and it has not been smooth so far. Kind of going through the mental hurdle of trying to get a little bit of money spent, I think would be friction for the next panel.
So it seems that ultimately there would have to be some kind of supervision of expenses to make sure that it's not misused. That is inevitable in any organization, especially a nonprofit. And I think that with the right attitude and with the understanding that this really is meant to be spent by the ZOMG at its very wide discretion within the broad confine of the 501c3 in the ZIP 1014, it might be as simple as using your business credit card in any company or nonprofit and having someone at the end of the day match up the receipts, but it doesn't have to be any more heavyweight than that.
If it could work like that, as smoothly as you described, that would be great. I guess there is a gap between kind of theory and implementation that we have experienced.
I think I think if we're implicitly asking the community to carve out a tiny portion of the ZOMG slice for ZOMG to spend as it wants, I think there needs to be some more kind of context around that, so that they understand, so that the community understands what it's signing up to.
Okay, so if we kind of just transcribed what I said, would that be enough?
I think probably also there needs to be some idea of how much we're talking about.
I'm sure the current panel can kind of put their heads together and try and ballpark, figure it out, or we leave it to the next panel to decide. I don't know, but it's fair to kind of put a cap on the amount. I don't think anybody on the ZOMG will go crazy, but sure, it's good to put a number as a ceiling.
Well, what are some other examples like the website where ZOMG wasn't able to get something approved or do something because they were waiting for the Zcash Foundation to sign off on it or provide the funding?
There was a soft kind of suggestion that we hire somebody in the interim before Dan Wilandi finally joined as the ecosystem relations manager. Yeah. That would have been helpful because we knew it was going to take a while to hire and then onboard the person. So that's another example. But I mean, I think it's pointless to kind of rehash what we've already discussed. I think we're on the same page right now, and we should just move forward. Okay.
And I guess another question I'd add is, why should the Zcash Foundation have to utilize its own funds, or employment resources are helpful to assist ZOMG, but I think to some extent, why are we so adverse to allowing ZOMG to tap its own funds for non-grant purposes if there's a monetary cap?
I think the only reason is that to do that requires that we amend 1014. So from my point of view, it makes a lot of sense to do that, because I would like to be able to judge the performance of OMG inclusive of its expenditures. So having the admin fees, T&E funds coming from ZF complicates the accounting there and makes it harder to judge the performance of the fund, if you will. So we're here at the drafting table. I think that the key question is not what are they going to spend the money on? That's up to them. These are smart, creative people. They're going to tell us what they think they should spend the money on, and the community will ultimately judge whether or not that was well spent. Obviously, there are concerns about we can't have them spending funds on things that violate the 501c3 integrity, but I think that's a solvable problem. But the important question is the magnitude. How big should it be? What's reasonable and what makes sense? I think we should at least suggest something here today that feels good around the table.
I mean, to be clear, I'm not averse to this happening. It's more a question like there's this suggestion, but I think the devil is in the detail here. And some of these things were considered and discussed previously, and ultimately didn't make it through into the final ZIP 1014. So I think there needs to be a strong, well, in my opinion, there needs to be a strong case made for making a change. So I think that being able to articulate exactly what how much we're talking about, what sort of oversight there will be over that expenditure. How
about I don't know, 10% of the monthly block reward, and the sequence it'll be liquidated into US dollars or equivalent per month. So there's always that kind of amount. And I don't know, we could maybe, if it is not spent, then I don't know, maybe this is a bad idea, but I'm thinking we don't want an ever increasing pile of money to be spent. So if it's not spent once a year, when the term finishes, it gets canceled out. I think 10%. So if you think about the way nonprofits are run, a large amount, much larger than 10%, is spent on overhead and marketing outreach or fundraising. I think 10% is a very, very reasonable amount.
What's 10% approximately?
Good question. Jack, you have your little spreadsheet. Look it up. Dashboard. You can go ahead while I try and dig up a number. But I remember Zooko mentioning it's 8 mil a year at a price a couple months ago. So that's 800,000 at a pretty high value.
Okay.
So to date, ZOMG has accrued, well, as of a couple of days ago, 102,000 ZEC. So 10% of that, say 10,000 ZEC at a current price of.
Hey Jack, did I get the math right that ZOMG's 8% slice is equal to 35,000 coins a month? Sounds like a lot.
That sounds too high.
Oh yeah, I forgot to divide by the number of years in the dev fund. So divide that by 4, 8,750 coins a month for ZOMG.
Sounds more. That sounds more. More in the ballpark.
So what's that in US dollars per month?
1.5 million.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's too much.
Okay. So I remember.
No, that's the whole ZOMG slice.
Oh,
Unless I forgot
Okay.
to divide by
That would still
something.
be 150K per month, which I think is
Yeah,
pretty lush for a.
it's
admin
pretty
firm.
lush. Yeah, pretty lush.
Yeah, I remember
we
when we
could
had
say-
this. Oh, go ahead.
We could say 10% subject to some max US dollar equivalent, because as the price fluctuates, right? You wanna manage for that.
We could specify a dollar number.
Yeah, I remember when we had the information center for the information session for ZOMG prospective candidates. Chris was on the call, and I think he said something along the lines of 500,000 a year. Does that sound more reasonable? Ballpark?
Comparing to the expenses that have been mentioned so far, it still sounds an order of magnitude too high, which is why I'm very curious about other prospective expenses.
Well, we haven't been able to spend anything so far. We couldn't hire anyone, we couldn't build a website, we couldn't do other fun stuff. Although on our part, we haven't thought of much fun stuff. I mean, it's kind of a chicken and egg, right? If you don't know if you can do something, why do something? I think 500 is, yeah.
So I want to point something out. When ZIP 1014 was ratified in February of 2020, the price of Zcash was $64. So at that time, the MGRC slice of 8,750 coins a month was worth about $500,000 a month. And now it's worth $1.5 million a month. That's all.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like a 10% subject to a dollar cap per month sounds reasonable. And the dollar cap will be much lower than the current price right now.
Okay.
I mean, the entire market is so frothy right now. I think looking at today's prices probably doesn't make sense.
It's probably going to get frothier.
For
Okay.
how long though? I mean, we got to manage kind of
Yeah,
the downside.
agreed. Okay, and so the way somebody else had asked about this, the way that ZIP 1014 currently reads is there's this paragraph 1 in the MG slice major grant section that says these funds must only be used to issue major grants to external parties that are independent of ZF. I was going to add an exception there for the provisions outlined in a paragraph 8, which would be new. And then there we could add, you know, something that says the committee shall have the option to use funds from the MG slice to hire contractors for administrative or operational support, you know, subject to whatever cap we agree on. Does that sufficiently get around the existing language and successfully amend it, or is there more?
Can you say that again, the proposed line?
Well, I guess really what's relevant here is paragraph 1. It says these funds must, how it currently reads is these funds must only be used.
What's your proposal?
Yeah. These funds must only be used to issue major grants to external parties that are independent of ZF, with the exception of the provisions outlined in paragraph 8. And then listing in paragraph 8, what we just talked about, which is, you know, the committee can have the option to use the funds for to hire contractors for administrative and operational support, subject to the cap.
What about marketing? What about, well, why put a limitation on the use of those funds?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I heard the answer, I heard an answer before, which was oversight to prevent misuse of the funds. But
It's a good point, Zooko. Yeah, we shouldn't restrict
like the committee themselves and the public scrutiny of the committee's actions and the elections are sufficient for this level of thing. So if we're allocating, how much is it going to be? So there's going to be some dollar cap. So it's something in the order of tens of thousands of dollars a month or $100,000 a month.
Tens of.
Something like that. Yeah, why not just say that the elected 5 committee members can do whatever they think is right, and then they're going to have to justify that to the community.
Yeah, I agree. You can easily imagine the funds being used for cloud services or printing posters, or maybe even airdropping coins and gold balls and
meetups,
the panel.
airdrops,
Yeah,
skydiving.
Yeah, I mean, also to protect the ZF, we can just say it's subject to veto, right? We're not going to do those things until, in fact, I guess the ZF manages the disbursement of those funds, so there's no question that they'll see it. So I think we should put that in. We don't want to jeopardize ZF structure.
Okay.
Right. So there's 2 layers here. What ZIP 1014 says ZOMG ought to do or ought not to do, and then the ZF's legal obligations, which supersede whatever ZIP 1014 says anyway. So wait, this isn't 1014 anymore. This is 1014.a or something. But anyway, this one, I don't think it helps to add restrictions in this document.
Good point.
Okay.
There is another set of, I think, implicit restrictions that aren't to do with 501c3, are not to do with ZIP 1014, but are to do with just really common sense. And it's things that could have an adverse impact on, for example, the regulatory status of Zcash.
I agree those things exist, but documenting them in ZIP 1014.a probably doesn't help.
Agreed. But I think it is something to be aware of, because obviously, Zooko, you and I are deeply, aware of a lot of those things and the implications of certain actions. But the broader community and members of a future ZOMG may not. So it's just I'm not saying there's an obvious solution here. I'm just saying it's something to be aware of.
That's a good point, Jack.
Another potential complication is when it comes to employees. If the ZOMG decides to hire a W-2 employee, then that creates obligations that are actually borne by the foundation rather than by them, in terms of taxes, harassment, and so forth.
Yeah, I think
that's correct too. And let me interrupt real quick. So that's another, yet another, a 4th or 5th layer of oversight and requirements and so forth. So if the ZIP 1014.a or whatever we're calling it doesn't specify the intended use or restrictions on the allowable use of these funds, then ZOMG would still basically be unable to hire W-2 employees, because you need both money and a legal entity to do that, and they only have money.
I'm thinking when we say spend funds to hire somebody, I'm not thinking that we submit the W-2 form. We are the legal entity. I'm just saying the funds come out of us, but they can sit under the general protections of a legitimate employer like the CS.
Well, Ron's point, if I understood correctly, was that hiring a W-2 employee comes with a whole bunch of obligations and responsibilities. So my interpretation of a ZIP 1014.a or whatever we call it, that said ZOMG can use these funds, a certain amount of them or whatever, however they want. And then if the ZOMG committee members got together and said, now we want to hire a W-2 employee, then that wouldn't happen. Why not? Because you have to have an employer sign off on that, and the ZOMG is not an employer, so they can't hire W-2 employees. Because that imposes a whole bunch of obligations on that employer, and ZIP 1014.a doesn't say that ZF will take on all those obligations for whoever ZOMG wants to hire.
And we couldn't commit to that anyway. you know, ultimately, if you know, it's not just obligations, it's also the liability of if a person, you know, acts, you know, commits illegal acts or fraud or misrepresents, or you know, so there's a whole bunch of stuff there that leaves us open to
me. Yeah, I agree with what Jack just said. And so if the text says there's a certain amount of money that ZOMG can use for what they think is in the service of their mandate, then they wouldn't be able to hire W-2 employees because they don't have the structure to do it. But they would be able to hire contractors, I guess, and they would be able to sponsor events and do airdrops and all kinds of stuff, grants, or like give it to Gitcoin, donate it through Gitcoin to other people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
What's your point, Zooko? Are you trying to lead us down another path, or are you just pointing out?
No, I'm saying the simple text. The simple text along the lines of what Jason proposed that says there's a certain amount of the MGRC/ZOMG slice, which the committee has discretion to use. So basically it's accepted from the text that says this money must be only used for major grants, right? If there's a subset of that, which is allowed to be used for things other than major grants, then MGRC or ZOMG wouldn't be able to get anything done that violates the Zcash Foundation's legal requirements. They wouldn't be able to hire W-2 employees because that has a bunch of legal requirements that ZOMG can't meet, but they would be able to do a whole bunch of other stuff. So basically I'm saying it sounds fine to me.
and you know, at the risk of repeating what I said before, to my mind, there's currently nothing preventing ZOMG from issuing an RFP for a given task or a given service, and then receiving proposals from outside companies, and then effectively issuing a grant to cover that.
It sounds like last discussion, there were concerns about that being, you know, more or less too bureaucratic or taking time to be approved. Yeah.
And nobody under 30 is going to respond to an RFP, period.
Well said.
I think our whole grants program is effectively an RFP.
We haven't gotten enough applicants, maybe to David's point.
So RFPs may plausibly answer the cases of major contracting, but not the case of printing posters or smaller jobs. The overhead is too high. So a good model is academia, which deals with very similar things. Hiring does go through an announcement process, but services rendered and purchases are at the discretion of the scientists. And I think that does make sense, except that in here we might be talking about major contractors rather than employees for the reasons that Zooko explained so well. Maybe it makes sense to have some kind of line between the two, maybe some threshold for contracting above which an RFP would be issued. Then, you know, there would be a couple of weeks for other candidates to apply, and the expected outcome is that someone who was recognized as capable, which is why the RFP was issued in the first place, is likely to be selected, but others have a chance to. That is the rationale for why universities do it.
My feeling is that in general, we don't have, okay, so this is very general, so, and maybe it's not shared by everyone, but my feeling is we already have like more than enough oversight and structure and process, and we need less. So I'd just like to say, here's an amount of coins, or amount of dollars or something, the next ZOMG committee, whom none of us know who's going to be on that, just have as complete control over that as the rest of the world's legal obligations will allow. And then the way oversight's going to happen is the whole rest of the community is going to ask them what they did with it and why, and then judge them on how well they spent it. Especially if it's a small amount. Like if we're talking about the whole 8%, 8,750 coins, that's one thing. But if we're talking about a fraction of that, let's just make it easy.
Even 10% feels material at today's valuation.
Yeah, 150,000 a month at today's
Yep.
valuation. Yeah, that's not a small amount for sure, but that is the level of spend where what I personally would like to see is more experimentation and less oversight, and more like ex post facto. People look back 6 months later and they say, how did that work out? Who made that decision? Instead of a process and permissioning and rules and all that stuff.
I agree. It's just all I'm saying is the stakes are high at that level of spend.
Yeah, good point.
It would
It's
probably be
also-
worth having some sort of formal review and feedbacks, you know,
Yeah.
rather than just, you know, leaving it up to the cap. I think it would behoove us to have a, you know, a formal review and feedback. Sorry, Alex. I interrupted you.
Just to say in response to what Zooko was just saying, you know, the funds spent by ZOMG, when all this comes about in whatever form it comes about in, those funds are under our 990 and they're under our annual audit. So there is a little more to that oversight piece than you're making it sound like. There has to be more there, but that in no way limits us doing this. But there has to be process in place. That's the point. There has to be
Can you say
documented
more about
process.
Can you say more about what the requirements are for that 990 reporting?
I mean, they're extensive, but the point being that, like, as you just said, like the community can decide if those were spent well, if that funding was spent well. Absolutely, they can on the outcome side without question. But what went into how those funds were handled, how they were dispersed, and how they were spent on administrative and other things does affect ZF. So I want to make it super clear. I'm not saying that's an insurmountable issue or anything like that, but it requires, like you were talking before about the different layers. The other layer to this is agreeing on process. That's not over, you know, that's not, you know, too onerous or anything like that, but agreeing on process to be sure when we're audited annually that everything's fine and there's no issue there. So there is a little more complexity. But again, just to be 100% clear, it doesn't stop us from doing anything. It just requires thought from kind of a different viewpoint a little bit.
Yeah.
So add the IRS 990 reporting and auditing as like a sixth or whatever, I've lost count, but as a sixth constraint, which is outside of and supersedes the text of ZIP 1014.a.
Right. Well, and again, like when we talk about oversight or you know, determining success, like these are all, the community has a huge role in that, but then we're beholden to this big entity that we need to consider throughout. But again, it's certainly not an excuse not to move forward with changes or have this discussion or anything, nothing like that, but it has to be considered as we're having the conversation.
Yeah, I think, Alex, you put together a list of processes by which we approve and vet grants. I think that was a good step. I think some amount of clarity around what the steps are and agreement from both sides that those are the right steps would be helpful. I think some level of discomfort was felt in kind of the amorphousness of like, do we really need to ask? And when we ask, we don't get back favorable response. Can we push back? Why not? I think that has led to some amount of delay and discomfort.
Yeah, it's a joint process to create that process, obviously. Like I totally agree on that. And I do think, you know, we would need to consult a little more to make sure that hiring is a huge thing. So we already talked about the W-2 and all that. That's a big part of this. The contracting, we would just have to be sure that everything's totally set on the process side and that, but I have no doubt we can make that work. The other thing to just acknowledge is that depending on the amount that is allocated towards like this discretionary fund, it does create quite a bit more work for us administratively. And so again, having those processes nailed down will reduce that work to as manageable level as possible. So that's, this is my team that works on all this. And so, that's what I'm thinking of here. For the record, I do think ZOMG needs help. They need assistance with that they need technical assistance. They need the ability to make these decisions and go do these things without us being fully involved in all that. I'm fully in favor of it. I'm just thinking through some of the detailed stuff once we get to that point.
And this
give me a little more clarity about what the IRS 990. I think the IRS 990 reporting is the income, the assets and liabilities and the expenses of the organization through the course of 1 year. And then you might need to break down the expenses, like if certain expenses rise above a certain level, then you have to report them separately or whatever. So what we're talking about here is there's Zcash Foundation has to be able to report accurately to IRS on the 990 form that X $100,000 this year went to this program. Right? Is there what other details need to be included in that, or what other constraints does that put on that program?
Right. No, that's a big part of it. We also have to make, a variety of statements, affirmative or negative statements on a variety of governance related things, which could, ZOMG under this structure we're talking about right this second could make some decisions that would impact some of those. So like the point though being that if we agree on process and the process is super clear and it's not overly complicated, then we shouldn't have any issue on that 990 IRS side. It's more, it needs to be part of, once we get to that part of the conversation, we just need to take all that into consideration. And that's where those constraints come in. So, we just filed ours today, actually. And so the good timing, that's why it's on front of my mind right this second.
Congratulations.
I'm very happy about it. It's a tough process. We have an external audit every year. This discussion adds complexity to that, but it in no way stops us from doing almost all of this. I think the employee part is the important part. That's a non-starter, but off the top of my head, it's very tough to think of anything else that would be like, wow, that's a huge red flag. As long as we're not talking about advocacy and the things that nonprofits aren't supposed to do, but there are limits to that. There's some flexibility in some of those things as well. So not to go off on a tangent in this discussion. So
can I just ask for clarification? If we decide that we need 6 to 12 months of support from somebody, what would that, how would we do that? We can't hire somebody. Can we do a contractor?
Yeah, independent contractor. And so we would provide that template. We'd work together on what that scope looks like and then contract with that person.
Okay, and that person would be signing with you or with ZOMG?
Us. And so so when I talk about the RFI process, the reason why we've talked about that so much is that if we could create that expert roster so people are ready to become independent contractors when you need them on short notice, they would be contracted through ZF and they're providing services to your committee to give you that support and expertise.
Okay, cool.
So the foundation itself actually, does this. We have people that we just contract with, simple statement of work and, a daily or an hourly rate or whatever it is. And it means that we get to utilize, cryptographic expertise, auditing, review of code or whatever, without needing to go out and hire someone full-time for that role. Because, we don't necessarily, for example, want to hire, a full-time code auditor. But and we don't also necessarily want to go out and get an NCC or a Candidate to do a big review. We just want someone to come in, spend a few days looking at something, to make sure that there's no obvious glaring issues. So it's a pretty straightforward thing to just to you know, contract with someone to do either a specific job or for a short period of time. But again, you know, it just needs to be done. It just needs to be done right. And I feel like sometimes, like, you know, part of the some of the frustrations that you know are evident, maybe around the fact that in general, you know, the crypto space is quite fast moving. It's permissionless, and it's you know, not, it's you know, it's the antithesis of the sort of bureaucratic banking system and existing systems that we're all looking to replace. The unfortunate fact is that, you know, the foundation is a legal entity with, you know, within a legal jurisdiction, and it does have, you know, obligations which are effectively restrictions, and there's also, I'd say as well, just best practice that is appropriate for certain activities, you know, and I'm sure that, you know, Zooko and DC will, you know, will have the same sort of things that they do with ECC whether it's hiring people or contracting with people or whatnot. So yeah, it's so sometimes.
Well, that's why I think
it may sound like
third entity, but Jason said, well, I wasn't allowed to say that at the beginning of this meeting, so I'm trying to be quiet. Like I agree, the ZF has to do its thing the way it does. The ECC has to do its thing the way it does. I think the community wants something that's basically incompatible with that. So
yeah,
with that, now we're at the end of the meeting, and I don't know how far we're going to get at constructing an improved ZOMG within a USA 501c3.
look, I definitely would advocate for a separate third entity. And, you know, based on the poll that I circulated in early September, I think the community would get behind that. But it sounds like that's a bigger undertaking. And we want to fix, you know, the issues that came up during the first panel before the second panel is assembled, so that ZOMG is a lot more effective than it was during the first iteration. Now, I'm all for having separate talks on making ZOMG more, you know, autonomous and independent, but I think, you know.
Yeah, I agree. So, what we said so far in this meeting sounds good to me. Like, it sounds like an improvement.
Same. I feel like it was productive, also more productive than the first session.
Okay. And yeah, so great. Go ahead.
Wobbzz here. I was just curious, did we talk about the timing of when to introduce this yet? I know you had a question in the PDF that you sent out.
Yeah, so the question that I asked in the PDF was, what's the best time to present the ZIP amendment proposal to the community? The two options that I considered were immediately, so that the concerns the current ZOMG committee members voiced were considered before the next committee convenes, or waiting for this 4-month window and asking the new committee members, you know, to vote if the current structure is unworkable, and then using it as a plan B. Based on this conversation, and I think based on, you know, what I feel community sentiment is, I think that we should do it sooner than later. You know, I'm still unclear on what the timing is for the elections. So it sounds like, am I right to say that it's not going to happen before the end of the year? It's probably going to happen early next year. That at least that the committee is assembled. Jack?
We're not sure. But basically, we've been waiting for legal for legal advice. We've been let down by the firm that we were speaking to. They just haven't come back with meaningful advice. It'll happen as soon as we are able to. You know, there's no. I'm chomping at the bit to get this process moving. It's incredibly frustrating for me to be waiting for clarity on this point to be able to move forward. So yeah, it'll happen as soon as possible. I'd love it for it to happen. I'd love to have the advice on my screen tomorrow, and then be able to go pull a trigger and say, right, we're reopening nominations. 2 weeks later, we're going to close them. There's going to be a community call, and then a week later, we're going to vote. You know, that's how quickly I would like to move. I would love to move that quickly, but it you know, as I've said before, I think it's it's unreasonable to do that without having full clarity around that inurement issue.
Sure. So let's talk about the timing. So if I was to draft something up in the next week or two, you know, we can either have another meeting in 2 weeks, or I can circulate it via email, and you guys can come back with your feedback to me directly. And then
or just posting it on the forums.
Yeah, or just posting it on the forums. And from there, we can just go through the ZIP process.
Yeah, I think the forums would be great.
Eran has something to say.
Yeah, I support that. I think the sooner the better. I do have to leave at the top of the hour, and I would like to raise another question briefly. We spoke at length about ZF's constraints. What about ZOMG's constraints? We have pretty rapid annual turnaround for the ZOMG members, and it's hard enough for the new members to sync up on the state of the grants in flight, those decided, those that need to be judged on the performance. Having to also keep track of the poster printing and contractors for perhaps many small tasks and so forth sounds like additional load and additional state that they would need to convey in their not very many monthly hours. What do you think of that, Michelle?
I think you're right. I think the term 1 year actually becomes a little bit awkward. It's not enough time to do something meaningful. At the same time, I feel like we're moving a lot of pieces. I don't know how people feel about moving that piece too. I think it is the better solution. I think I would want at least everybody to be involved for at least 18 months, maybe 2 years, maybe even 3 years, depending on whether they want to stay, whether they're being productive, whether they still have time. Because I think even among our current panel, people's time availabilities have dramatically changed during the cycle. So, but yeah, I think it's good of you to kind of bring that up. We haven't talked about cycle length yet.
So I think this needs consideration, because I think there's some feeling that not just for this reason, but also for many others, this parameter needs to be adjusted, including staggering the terms and so forth.
So we do have a plan for introducing staggering, a hack for introducing staggering.
And the average length of term, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's tied to the accountability piece. The community, so implicitly, people can judge the performance of community members by deciding whether to re-elect them or not. So, for example, Hudson's performance will be assessed by the community, and they'll either, if they feel he's performed well, then they'll re-elect him, and I for one will absolutely vote for him again. Whereas if you extend it out, then it means that there's less implicit oversight, and there's more scope for underperformance, I guess.
Well, then what you could do is you could have 2 or 3 seats that are like 2 or 3 year terms, 2 seats that are 1 year terms, and then somebody had mentioned this previously, but having the ability to sort of vote non-productive members off.
There's another layer of oversight. We're already over time, but there's another layer of oversight that automatically comes, which is that if one of the committee members is underperforming or going rogue or being crazy or whatever, then the other 4 are going to start ignoring that person, and they'll be outvoted.
Yeah, I certainly think it's one negative way to view kind of the situation. There are positive ways to view the situation too, or the benefits of having people be longer term oriented, as any board director of a publicly listed company will tell you.
Yeah, I agree to that, actually. And again, like with the other thing I said as a general philosophical thing before, I don't think we need better oversight. I think we need better effectiveness, which means less oversight in a way.
Maybe the question is to ask, how can we, what are the traits, what are the qualities, what are the skills, what's the what's the preferred shape of a ZOMG committee? Because it's something that I've thought about. You know, is it you know, technical knowledge, you know, familiarity with the Zcash protocol and ecosystem, external expertise? Like there's a variety of things that can contribute, you know, well, and that's something I think it's probably worth talking about.
Should we table these things for the next session? I think these are meaty topics, and we're at the end of the hour.
We can do that. Yeah.
Ron already had to go.
Yeah, I think we had till 2:30. He had to leave a little early. But if
Oh, okay, fine. I'm good then.
okay.
Oh, the invite. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll shut up.
So do you want to talk about that now or table it for another time?
No. If everybody had it for 2:30, please keep going.
So I think everyone agrees on ZOMG on amending ZIP 1014. Tell me if I misunderstood. What I thought I heard was that nobody objected to amending ZIP 1014. Nobody objected to amending it to give ZOMG discretionary pool that they could use discretionarily, exempted from the requirement that all the rest of the money gets used solely for major grants to third parties. As far as I've heard, I don't think anybody objects to having staggered elections, so there's more continuity among successive committees. So we could go ahead and propose that to the community next. Is that good enough?
The one thing that wasn't answered was length of term. I mean,
yeah,
you know, I'm just gonna raise it once, maybe twice, but it's worth considering.
So what would you suggest for the length of term?
I want to hear Michelle's answer, but I have another idea.
I think the bare minimum would be 18 months, and then longer depending. 12 months just feels really short to do something meaningful. At the same time, I recognize that some people might abuse the length of the term. So how do we put in safeguards is another question. I think pushing it to the community may not work because the community just chimes in when it does and doesn't when it needs to sometimes, right? And it's not clear to me that in the past polling the community was necessarily the best, wisest, fastest move.
Yeah, just also to add to that, we were just talking about this at a recent ZOMG meeting, which is the tiered approvals that the committee has decided, you know, all 5 members have to approve over a certain amount. And, you know, so that would have to be somewhat adjusted because like you said, Zooko, you know, they could if somebody was acting rogue or doing something, they could be outvoted under the way that the committee has currently adopted those thresholds. That's actually not true for certain amounts.
Yeah,
but easily change.
I agree.
Yeah.
That could cause an unintended consequence. Yeah. I think 18 months is fine. I think Michelle has a good point that like boards of companies typically serve forever and ever, it feels like. I've been on the board of a company for as long as I can remember. So yeah, like the continuity and the familiarity with the process that people get from doing it for a long time seems to be advantageous according to the typical behaviors of nonprofits and corporations around the world. I do want to point out that Michelle's experience with ZOMG1 is hopefully not at all representative because A, committee member quit early on in the process. B, the ZF wasn't set up didn't have structure and process in place to support ZOMG. C, all 5 of the members were brand new and had to get to know each other in the first place. And then D, the back half, the end of Michelle's stint was also quite atypical and involved all these discussions about changing things. And 5 out of 5 committee members saying they weren't going to run for re-election, and then one of them changed his mind and is going to run for election. But my point is, if we had staggered terms and like processes in place that people were already familiar with at the start, then maybe 12 months would seem like a lot longer and you'd have more time to get things done.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a much smoother process for the next committee. They're going to come in. Everything's, you know, the basics are going to be in place. There's going to be a template or a straw man, a kind of an anchor set of processes that they can follow, so they can adopt the previous committee's, you know, working practices, or they can choose to vary them or just throw them out and come up with new ones. But you know, I think the most important thing is that, you know, we've got Alex in place to support them on the process side. We've got Dan in place to support them, you know, in terms of being that point of contact with the grant folks, and you know, we're planning to look at how we can leverage you know, the ZF's communications resources and Winfred's time to help market major grants and spread the word. I think that you know, we'll be able to hit the ground running when the new committee starts.
So that said, 18 months sounds better to me than 12 months. And I'm not worried about the corresponding reduction in the opportunity for the community to vote someone out. For one thing, I think it's basically like, that's like, again, that's not our problem. Like having a bad actor infiltrate or an underperforming actor, sort of basically low risk, and we already have lots of ways to monitor and respond to that. And to what Alex said, I think one of the most important ways, which is underappreciated, I don't think the electorate is very good or very timely at detecting and responding to problems like that. But I think the other committee members are the best first line of defense. And so whatever that 5 out of 5 thing is that you guys agree, you should throw that out and go back to 3 out of 5. But I think 18 months sounds fine for what it's worth.
Okay.
Just so you're aware, I think a year is good. I think that that extending it, I just don't see a clear rationale for extending it. If people want to stay in position longer, they can run again, just as you know, is currently happening.
I think another thing to consider is that the funding is not coming in perpetuity. We're working with a limited time frame here, so
good point.
You know,
Anybody else have an opinion on that?
We have 2 opposing opinions, that's all.
Yeah, so what would we do in this sort of
I'm
situation?
mildly in favor of 18 months, but
Is it something that
either
I mean, I could write it into a ZIP amendment and then, you know, post it to the forum and the community could vote, or, I mean, we could all just agree to keep it 12 months.
I think it should be discussed on the forum. I'm not opposed to 18 months. I just think anything more than 18 months, I'm not sure that would be good in the best interest. You know, just considering how much things have changed for some of the current ZOMG members and things like that. Yes, people could step down, but you know, and the ecosystem changes very rapidly too. Like, you know,
yeah.
We also don't have term limits, by the way.
Yeah.
And sorry, wobbzz, I thought you were done, but just we don't have term limits, so like Jack said, people can run over and over again, you know, for as long as they want. So it sounds to me like I totally understand a year doesn't seem long enough to get all these things done, and I would agree with that, but they're not limited to a year. They're only limited if they don't get reelected or if they choose not to run.
that's a good point.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
How are we going to stagger it on the next term? People sign up for what, X months, 12 months, 18 months, but how do we eventually stagger it?
Well, there's 2 ways to do it. One is, since we're amending ZIP 1014, might as well specify a different election cycle and staggering in the amended version. The other way is a hack that Dodger came up with that I don't remember.
Drawing straws.
So Yeah, the hack requires that the new committee embraces the principle and agrees to do it. And the idea is that 6 months in to the new committee, 2 or 3 of them just resign, and we hold another election to replace those seats. And that way, then you then from thenceforth you have 3 people being elected at one point and 2 people being elected at another point 6 months later.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking of with this, instead of like the drawing straws, is that you could do it this way. You could either amend the ZIP or not amend the ZIP, have 3 people serve the 12 months, and then 2 people, either resign, or you specify in the ZIP amendment that they serve 6 or 12 months, the other people serve 12 or 18 months. And then what you do is you do it by amount of votes. So the people who got the highest amount of votes get to stay on for the longer term. The people who have the lowest amount of votes are the ones who have to rerun.
The other way, that is one way. Another way to do it would be to have people elected by class. So like class 1, 2, 3. So like many nonprofit boards will do like class 1 is 12 months. Like, so it's rolling. So you're never having too many people go off at once. Right. That's another way of doing it. So when it's not necessarily like a popularity contest or a vote contest. It's people are literally running for the 12-month seat, the 18-month seat.
Because it may be that there are some people who actually would only be interested in doing it for 6 months and then would want to, go off and do something else, or, maybe go and apply for the next grant. I think there's different ways of doing it. I think the whole point of the hack was that it was a quick and easy way to make it happen, without having to get into a huge sort of discussion about the exact wording and whatnot. But I'm not saying that my hack approach is the best way by any means. I think amending ZIP 1014 is absolutely not a bad idea for staggering terms.
Yeah, it also seems to me like since there's all these potential solutions and none of them are bad, they're all just kind of different. I mean, this is the perfect thing for the community to discuss and maybe come up with some new ones or throw their weight behind one of these solutions. I mean, they all accomplish the same thing, right? Yeah. Which is to just kind of keep this rolling forward.
Okay, so I write up the ZIP amendment, I submit it to the forum, we have a comment period, and then I guess some sort of informal poll on the forum before bringing it to ZCAP. Is that sort of the process we're looking at?
Well, hold on. What's the poll? I think we have consensus within this committee that elections should be staggered, right? I'm happy abandoning Michelle's 18-month stints in light of the other comments that wobbzz and Jack and Alex made. So I propose we leave that off and leave it at 12 months, and leave it unchanged.
Okay. So then what we do is we amend the ZIP, we post it to the forum, we have a comment period, and assuming there's no alternative ideas proposed, then it goes through the ZCAP for their vote.
Or even if there are alternative ideas proposed, we can present them all to the ZCAP, and then whichever one is the most popular.
True.
So I guess the structure would be: do we want staggered term limits? Yes or no? And assuming that the vote is in favor of staggered term limits, what format should those take? So I think it'll be a 2-part question.
Sorry, I might have missed something, but isn't Jason going to write up like a whole amendment to ZIP 1014, and we'll just propose the whole package to the ZCAP? Yes or no?
That's what I plan on doing. Yes.
Unless there were alternatives to one or two specific things, right?
Yeah, in which case it makes sense to do what Dodger's saying. Just in the name of like brevity.
And this comes with the Independent ZIP 1014 Review Committee's collective blessing. Like, do we all agree not to object to any of these?
As I've said before, the foundation's participation in this call does not imply an endorsement of anything that Jason writes, nor does it imply that nobody else is allowed to put forward changes to ZIP 1014. I want to be absolutely crystal clear on that.
Yeah.
This does not represent endorsement. Zooko, you can choose to endorse it if you want, but
well, my thought was that the ZCAP would probably want to see, like, here's a proposal, and the Independent Review Committee collectively thinks it's good, right? And to the degree that we can't do that, it gets more complicated, but that's okay. We could say, like, ZF has this separate stance for reasons, but the rest of the review committee thinks it's good, or most of them think it's good, or something. Like, basically, the ZCAP, it doesn't, I don't think they want to take time to make a bunch of decisions, or they want to find out what 5 different people's opinions were. So I think we should recommend it to them in some way, make it easy on them.
I mean, they're not inconsistent, right? Like this committee could put forth this as a good option for ZCAP to consider. The Zcash Foundation itself is not endorsing anything. And, you know, people can still propose alternative ideas.
Sounds good to me.
Jack, you agree with that?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I said, I think.
Okay. So then I will put this forward as the committee's recommendation as a ZIP amendment.
Yeah, it sounds perfect.
Yeah, I think the point of like a committee was so that we can cut through the maelstrom on the forum and to present this is what has been discussed. People are roughly in agreement, not officially endorsing, but this is a
sorry. No, I'm gonna step in there and say that I'm not saying that the foundation agrees with this.
Yeah.
I reserve the right. I reserve the right to, you know, having considered the wording and having thought about it, having consulted with my board, to say actually the foundation does not support this. I will not be, you know, sort of railroaded into supporting something just because.
But I don't think you have. I think you can say Dodger.
I'm just being crystal clear about this.
Understood.
I think it's really important to be crystal clear so that when people are talking about it, the foundations and my position is not misrepresented.
Yep. I'll make that clear in any communication.
That's why we're asking.
Good.
And similarly, I won't say that the ECC endorses this unless Zooko wanted to do that separately. But I will say
that's a good question.
Zooko as a committee member, Jack as a committee member were comfortable putting this forward to the community to vote on the amendment.
There might also be a terminology, which if it's fair, like if Dodger in particular, but if each person agrees with it, which is to say that none of the committee members objected, right? Because for me, I'd be willing to say, yeah, I wouldn't fight against that. Yeah, like I don't think there's any, you know, red flags or anything objectionable in it. Maybe that would be easier for Dodger to get his board's approval on.
If only Eran didn't drop off.
But I'm sorry, do we need the board's approval? Like every member of the board is on the ZCAP, so they get a vote.
So you're conflating things now, and this is why I think that this proposed change, ZIP 1014, should come from Jason McGee.
Yeah.
Rather than from the committee, as it were. You know, the foundation's stance on a proposed change, you know, is a separate issue to what what you want to write up, Jason.
Okay.
But couldn't you tell us
actually,
the answer to that at some point? Like either after you see Jason's draft or whatever other steps you need to take, then
It may
would
be,
you in
you know,
principle be able to say yes, no, or neutral? Or do you want to, is like important to not have a stance on it?
I think that, you know, I'm personally inclined to, so my I think that it's up to the community. I think the community needs to make its decisions, and I think that it's I think it's the foundation's responsibility to give its considered opinion about the implications of certain proposed changes. So and we'll need to, you know, have a think about that and so on. But I just wanted to be crystal clear that the foundation and for myself and Alex have taken part in this conversation does not mean that we endorse or support the proposal that Jason is going to put forward.
I think that's thoroughly unfair to the efforts that Jason has put into these meetings. He's put in a lot of work. And if you're saying that and all of us
hold on, let me interrupt you, because thanks. Dodger came into this with an understanding, which was that participating in this was not going to imply some kind of endorsement, right? So I
think what he's indicating is that
I thought everyone already knew that. But my question is, couldn't you later endorse it like what's the word? Like volunteer, like maybe endorse is the wrong word, but what Dodger said was the decision should be up to the community, but couldn't you, assuming that whatever Jason comes up with looks good to you, couldn't you like recommend or like tell the community it looks good to you? But you're not obligated to do that at this point. But my question is,
I'm just not committing to doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And,
okay,
and to be clear, I was, and Jason, you know, I'm sure you'll contradict me if I'm misrepresenting what I said. I was very clear with Jason that you know, before we had the first meeting of this, you know, group, that you know, it shouldn't, our participation should not be interpreted as you know, creating any kind of official, you know, status for this group, and nor should it be interpreted as discouraging anybody else from putting forward proposals.
I 100% agree with you, Jack. You made that crystal clear, and I actually said that as a disclaimer at the opening of the first meeting. So understood.
I just think, you know, as a community, we're just screwing around. You know, we all want the same goals, and how I feel like we should be able, as people who've been working on this for a while, me least of all among all of you, the amount of time I've spent versus all of you, should be able to come to a proposal that we all roughly agree with and just have the community tell us if that's what they agree with. And I find it ludicrous that we're kind of sitting here arguing about how we're going to disagree or we refuse to agree. I don't know, like whatever the terms of entering this committee, joining this committee was, that's my point of view on what has happened.
All right, so I'll put together a draft and then we'll take it from there. I may reach out to a few of you prior to posting it to the forum, as I'd like somebody to just, you know, read the draft beforehand. But I think that I can be done with it, you know, as soon as 2 weeks from today, maybe if I get tied up on other things, three weeks, but I'm really going to shoot for 2 weeks. Does that timeline work for everyone?
Sounds great. Thank you, Jason.
Works for me. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Definitely appreciate you doing it.
Okay, we got 4 minutes left. I mean, does anybody have any questions or anything else?
I just want to say thank you. I'm really glad you're doing this job.
Happy to do it. And thank you guys for, entertaining me and meeting with me and working so well together.
That's great. It's great to have people in the community who are proactive and putting forward proposals like this.
Happy to
Whether
do
or
it.
not I personally agree with it. No, but it's really good. Like, I think having an active community is really important, I think, for Zcash, and having people who are engaged and proactive and constructive is really, really great.
Yep.
So I echo Zooko in saying thank you for that.
Thanks. Okay. So I guess we'll call that a wrap, and I'll be in touch soon.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks for your time, guys. Take care.